Morning, Glenn.
Good morning.
Andy and Pete. We got the professor here on web services today. Today is webinar 45, Friday, January 25th, 2013, at our ungodly hour of 6 a.m. So welcome back.
Good to be
I'm
back.
anxious to hear about your web services, Glenn.
Morning, everybody. Well, first off, I want to say this professor went to school in Nashville on web services from Andy. So he broke that open for us, and I thought it was a good presentation. And last week, and I decided just to go in a little different vein. And what I wanted to do with these web services, and in fact, what we'll show here now has become part of our class for creating web services and consuming them. And really the purpose of this is just to show how powerful web services can be, but really with the WD language, how easy it is to make them and the different things you can do in the web service that I had never really thought of before. What I'm trying to do is keep this generic enough that I could use this for any table in my project or possibly any table in any database on another server and in another project. So what I've done is I've kind of taken some examples that PC Soft shows how it similarly works on the iPad, and I moved it over to desktop right now, and also within WebDev. And so let me go ahead and run this first to show you what's happening. And as we were working through these, what I've done is given functionality for procedural programming using HFilter, HAdd, HModify, HDelete, HExecuteSQLQuery, and actually HExecuteCode up on your web server. So let's run this, and we'll just select HFilter. And as you see, we're populated in a standard table, not doing anything fancy with that. The purpose of this is just to retrieve the data. And then also to make the round trip and do an update. So let me apply the update. And there we go, and see the record was modified. So let's take this in its beginning or its simplicity here and see how we filter the H records, the H filter.
Hey, Glenn, go ahead and minimize that Adobe Connect screen when you're behind there again.
I'm not, okay. Okay?
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so actually let me check this out. Okay. We come back here, and actually to call the web service right now, this is all that I'm doing, is I'm declaring it as a buffer. And actually when we want to retrieve, when we're sending back and forth, what I've chosen to do is use a structure, and we'll define what those are, how we're passing the data up, and then we use a structure and we use the buffer to receive the data. But what I've really done is I've put all these functionality that I've got in global procedure. So it just eliminates a lot of coding, and we just pass our values to the procedure. So here's an HFilter_WS. I pass in a connection. That way we can stay on this server, or we can move to another server if we want. And by default, you can see I've got a GS default connection, and if it's an open quote, close quote, it's going to use the default that's relying on the analysis that's on the web server. And then we're passing what table we want to work with and what our filter is. And we're also passing in the elements that make up the structure that we're going to pass to it. So let's go look at that code. And here's the structure that I've done. This is a structure that's going to hold all the information that I need for sending up to the server. So I need to know the connection. I need to know the file. I've got the filter, and then the elements that I'm sending up that actually make up the structure that's going to return the data. That way I never have to actually send the structure up, or I never have to create a structure on the web service, because it's actually there and I just fill in the elements. And then I tell it what type I'm going to do, whether it's going to be XML or binary. And then these next fields, this has to do with how I'm going to be handling an image when I'm sending it up. The encryption password, the type of encryption that I'm doing, and the format of the encryption. And we'll look at that actually as we get to the mobile portion of that this morning. But that caused me the most problems trying to figure out how do I handle an image going across the internet. And then I come down here and I just populate my structure, and then I serialize it. I take that structure and I serialize the structure into a buffer, and I'm sending this up as binary. And then what I'm doing is when I actually call the web service, which is right here, I just send it the buffer. And when it comes back into my buff received. I return that buffer back into my code here. Now, what I want to show also is how I'm getting the elements of the structure that's going to hold all the elements for my data set. So if I go to project code, and let's make sure it's here, I actually have declared a structure here. Actually, that's not the one. This is the structure here. This would be a structure for my contacts and my structure for people. So I have two different tables I'm working with. So I use that structure. But what's really kind of nice is I can go out and I can get just the names of the elements in the structure. But for the case of sending everything up to the server, I need to be able to send that information up. And so PCSoft gives us a nice way of getting that, and it's called get definition. And Bob Bruce is the one who put me onto this. So given a definition and giving it a data type or a variable, or in this case a structure, I then can loop through every single element of that structure, and I will get the name and I will get the data type. And so I build that as a string. And actually, let's run this. Let's see, where do I want to run this here? Stop there. So we're going to filter on contacts. Not be where it was. Stop. Oh yeah, it is. So let's continue on with this. And here's my elements, and let's look at that. So here's everything that I just grabbed from that structure. I put it into a string, and I just send this up to the web service now. And so let's continue running this. F8. Okay, I'm going to serialize it. I'm going to take the structure that we've just got up on top here, put it into a buffer, serialize it, and now I send it up to the web service. And the buffer received, and don't you just love their debugger? We can go through and see everything that's coming through. Okay, and this is all coming back as XML, as you can tell. And then as I come back to the procedure, it's going to populate it. Now what's really nice is how we populate this is, let's go back to HFilter, and we use source to screen. Andy put me onto this. This is way cool. What we've done is I'm deserializing this buffer into an array. And the array here is an array of structure contacts. So every single occurrence of my structure contact in my gen array is going to be a record. And then just to have it populated on that table, take this table, and if you look at the contents, the source browse is the array gen array, and then each of the items in the table are linked to an item in that structure of the array. So quite frankly, it's pretty easy with this implementation to call the web service, but the question is, what does the web service actually look like? Well, what I've done is, rather than switch back and forth between the web service, I've imported my methods here from the web service so we can see what they look like. So the only difference here is these are just the calls that I make in the web service as opposed to the actual web service itself. So if I do an HFilter, we'll look at how we call that or handle that on the web service. So from down below, when we called the web service, we just passed the buffer. So here, the buffer is actually coming into the web service. Here's my structure that I'm going to be using for retrieving the connection, the file, the filter. Okay, and I deserialize that and I put it all into my my structure. Now here's one thing that I've done is, remember we passed the connection to it? Well, if there is something in the connection, then I go and execute that code. And what would I put in that, that code? If we go look at project code, I could actually put in, I could put this in, because then it will point to the server and it will point to whatever we need, and it will open the connection and it will change the connection. Or we could just put in, for using the a connection on the server, we could just put in this if you've got a connection by that name. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. If we go back and take a look at the HFilter, once I've executed my connection, then what I do is I come down and I'm actually using this string here, and this is all the code that's going to run in the web service. But right now it's a string because there's a few things I need to do. That's all those elements that I pass in, they're going to actually go right here. So this becomes part of my structure definition. And then I have my array, again, is array of restructure, HDeactivate filter. More than likely I don't need to do that because the filter should be deactive because we're only coming in the one time each time. And then I'm going to do an HFilter, and we're going to use the file, and we're going to use the filter that's passed up in the structure. We're going to do a file to array. Okay, so I've got my results set. Now I'm going to take all those records, and I'm just going to put them in the array. And of course, the array now is the same structure that I've got down below, holds the same structure. And now what I'm doing here is, if there is an image, what I need to do is I need to loop through every single item. We'll talk about this in the web service, but I need to be able to encrypt that picture that would be coming down to the to the calling program, or from the calling program. And now what I have to do here is, what I was finding, if I didn't pass up a picture, I was getting or an image, I was getting a compile error. So what I'll do is I'll take this line, which is actually this, and I will make that to an open quote, close quote, so there's not actually any code that's running there. I think the best thing to do is I would do the same thing. I would just eliminate this for each loop. Okay, and then after I've gotten my record set, put it into an array, done any image processing if I need to, then I'll serialize it, and I'll put it into the array. I'll take the array, put it into a buffer, and this is going to be how it's coming back. I can specify if it comes back as XML or binary, and I've been using XML for right now, and that makes it nice because any other device or platforms that's going to consume this will be able to read the XML. Okay, so that's the string that we've got. I'm building my string by getting rid of this line if I need to, and then all I do is execute code. And so even though it's not hard-coded on the server as such, we just do that execute code and run it as if it were hard-coded at that point. Got any questions?
I don't see any. Okay. Anybody have questions? Just type it on the chat down below.
Okay.
Or raise your hand.
So let me just recap. Let me just recap what this is doing from the point of this browse here. In fact, let's actually step from the very beginning. The project code. I define the structure that I want to hold the data. Once I have that, I go out and I make these calls, and I actually find out what are these values that I've got, because I will pass these up to the server. Once I have that, all I do is I make this call right here. I send it the connection, the table, the filter, and the elements that are doing it. And then when it comes back, I'm going to deserialize it, and I'm going to just do source to screen. Now, here's a point. If you have a platform that doesn't support the source to screen, even though iOS says it supports source to screen, it does not appear that it does. So what I do is I just do a for each loop. And this is kind of interesting. We covered this on our last training session this past weekend. Is I have an array, but I did not know what my definition would be on here. And so, and we're on this line here. So if I do a for each and I do not declare this variable, WinDev is smart enough to know what that data type should be, which is way cool. Okay. So that's it for our filtering our records, and the way this is implemented, this is, since it's in the training material, and those of you who have use of it are free to use this. Really, all you have to do is import this. Actually, right here, all you have to do is import this global procedure in your application, make your calls, and you don't really have any web service coding that you have to perform. Now, if there aren't any other questions, or any questions, let me show you how we do the HAdd and HModify. So if we look under the Apply button, we're coding it very similar to what we would do for a regular HAdd or HModify. Is we actually have to fill in our field names equal some value. Okay, so I do that, but you can see that I'm using %1, %2, 3, and 4, and then I just do a string build. And I take and I substitute the 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the actual values. And I put it into a field list. So this works well whether it is for an HAdd or an HModify. And then if it's a new record, I call HAdd_WS and I pass the connection to it. I pass the table name and I pass the field list. And so it's going to work on the contact table, and these are the values that we're going to be working with in the web service. Otherwise, we call HModify_WS. We do a default connection, a table. The primary key that I'm going to look the data up as, because when we do an HModify, we don't have a record that's in context up on the web service. So we're actually going to do an hreadseek first to get that record. So that's why I need to know the table, why I need to know the primary key name, the value I'm going to look up, and then we send it the field list and also the image. Yeah.
Hey, Glenn. The %1, 2, 3, 4, that's probably a common thing that you do.
Yeah, but it's more that that's within the context of doing string builds. So instead of having to concatenate and make sure I've got the double quotes and all those things, you know, where you build each line, I just use that one string that's on multiple lines with a bracket, and then string build knows whatever value you have here is going to be substituted into here, and 2 is going to be this one over here. So that's I don't want to say a shortcut, but to me it's kind of an easy, clean way to program, and you can actually see how it's going to be structured. Because whatever you have between the brackets, that's just how it appears when you send it up or use it. So there's carriage returns in here, all embedded, and you don't even see those.
Wow.
So
nice.
Let's go look at the HAdd. This would be on the web service, and you can see all I'm doing is I'm passing to this procedure the connection, the file, the filter, those things. I'm building the structure again that goes up to the web service, because this is the information I need up there. Okay, and I'm filling my structure with that information. I'm going to serialize it. Now I'm actually making the call to the web service, which is right here. So now up on the web service end, I'm receiving the buffer. Here's my structure that I'm receiving all the information in of what I want to do, the connection again, the table name, the primary key. And I've got a primary key and a primary key value, which for HAdds I don't need. I really just need it for my HModify. But what I wanted to do was keep the structures the same between them, because then when I'm working on the previous code where it says if HAdd or HModify, then use the structure and populate it, that's the reason I do it. It's just the same structure. So then I've got that coming in. I deserialize it. I take the buffer that just came in. I deserialize it into the structure that I've just declared here. And I'm using binary again. I send my request up to the server in binary. And if I have a connection, I'm going to go ahead and execute it. And now I'm actually getting the values out of the structure. Actually, I'm declaring them here and getting them out of the structure. So here's my table name and my field list and my image or my picture. And then it's a simple matter of taking the %1, which was those fields where it said last name equals this value and first name equals this value and city and address and state, those kinds of things. And it goes in right here. It gets substituted right there as if you had coded that. And then we do if hadd with the file we sent in, and I've got a string that I'm coming back that says what record was added or error adding record. And then I do a string build, and at this point I am now executing the code that's all within here. And if we take a look at the HModify, since it's similar, passing everything up. Now the only thing that we're doing different here basically is I'm having to read the record. So I'm doing hreadseek first on my file using my field key. Yeah.
Hey,
Yes.
hey, Glenn. Before you go further, Chris had a question. He says, is there a reason for using binary to send the request to the server?
There is. There's a couple reasons, and the binary is smaller in format going up to the server, and it's not readable, and it is basically encrypted to some extent, that you can't intercept it and see what's going on since it's their binary version. So to me, it's the binary for the security is the biggest reason that I like using it, because if I actually wanted to send some other commands up there, you couldn't intercept them and hack that.
Kind of
Yeah,
a built-in
and actually
thing,
what's
huh?
really nice, besides you can send something up as binary, but you could actually encrypt the strings as they go up. So even put another layer of security within that. So back to this, we've got our string. We're going to build it to replace the value for the field list, and we just execute it. And it's as if you would have handwritten everything in here. Does that make sense to you all? It's just, to me, what's really cool is this is just W language coding, right? And just leveraging the ExecuteCode.
Sweet.
Let me take this another step, and we don't have to, well, we can run through it, but here's, now what I've got is, we do the same kind of thing, but I've got it, let's step back to this, I'm sorry. We were looking at contact, let me just show you what changes now if you're working with a different table. It's the same code, all I'm doing is I'm sending a people and sysid. And then, because it's using the default connection up there on the server, it knows to use that connection for the people table. Otherwise, I could specify a different one here. So using the exact same code from one table init to another table init, you can just change these values right here and get your different data. Of course, that is supposing, though, we do have to have, this was the structure for the contacts. But I do have to create a structure for the people. So I do have to do that. Now going over to the HExecuteSQLQuery, what I've done is, let's do an execute and look at that code. I'm run it so we can see what it looks like. Here's my SQL statement that I'm going to pass up to the web service. Execute it. And, excuse me. And we'll see, here's a SQL that's being sent up to it. Here, I'm having to do the same thing. Now I'm passing a connection to it. And this is actually the connection name that exists in the analysis. So rather than have code that's going up there, says use this connection because we need that for HExecuteSQLQuery. We pass up the SQL statement. And then again, the elements you can see is ID, contact is int, and last name is string. That's coming from our structure, which we interrogated. And now we will, we've made the call to that. We will deserialize it there. And here is our array that's come back. So we get to see every row that's in that array, and then we can actually see the value that's in those. You just got to love that debugger from here. And so now what I've done is I've got that table, but instead of using the source, we're going to actually go through and we're going to loop through the table and add each column as it comes through. So again, however you have your table defined, whatever order you have those columns, that's the order that we're going to be passing in here. Let's do this, and so there's my ID, there's my last name. This was just the first one we ran through. So let's go again. So there's some meaningful data. And then I will just populate that table. And I can also do updates, deletes, adds, modify, and deletes. And so let's take a look at the code behind there. And so I'm using the same thing. I'm doing the HExecuteSQLQuery, but now it's all based in my SQL statement. So if it's an add, I'm just going to do an insert into. And if it's an update, I'm going to update context set, and that. So I'm passing that up to my server. Yes, I'm allowing the server to accept the insert and updates and all those things, but if we come to here, you'll notice that I'm doing some translation. So if it's a select, I'm changing to an HSelect. It could be some other thing that's really cryptic. Or if it's insert, I'm making an HAdd. And if it's an update, I'm making an HModify. I'm just wanting to account in case somebody is going to hack into this and listen to it, and then they could try and send a string up to my web service and actually do some SQL injection. So this is one layer of defense, is I don't allow inserts on the line, because up on the web service, and we'll look at that in just a minute, we'll trap for the word insert. And then also what I'm doing is the SQL string itself, I'm also encrypting it within the structure, and then I'm going to serialize it, and I'm going to send it up as binary. So I think we have like 3 different levels here that we send it up by binary, so it's encrypted there. I'm changing insert to some other word. So up on the web service, I don't allow insert to come in. And then I'm also going to encrypt that SQL string, so you can't even, without the key, you won't even know what that SQL string is. So up on the web service, if we take a look at HExecuteSQLQuery, okay, here's if after all of that has happened, they actually are able to hijack this and send in their own command, and they put select or insert or update or truncate or any of that. I actually detect if that word exists, and if it is, there's no action taken, SQL injection detected, and that's what I return back to them. Otherwise, I will take the words that I changed from HSelect and I will make it back into a select, the HAdd into an insert, the HModify into an update, etc., etc., etc. And so once I have my string from there, this is the code that we've got. dsquery is data source, scompile is string, restruct is structure, and everything that I sent up within the context of that structure, those elements that make up that table get put right here. So it's as if we would have hand-coded that structure. Again, it's an array gen is array of restructure. And now I'm going to do that string build, or at least down further. So I put in my elements here in %1. I put in my SQL statement here, which is the insert, update, delete, those kinds of things. And then here I just do an if not HExecuteSQLQuery. We use the data source that's declared here. I pass in the connection name that came from the client program. I'm using HExecute without correction plus HNoBind, and then my SQL statement. And if it doesn't execute, I come back and scompile, and I've got an error executing the statement, so it tells you what you were trying to do. And then buff XML is scompile. So I run through all of this. All right, basically, I get down to the end, and I've got a result that comes out of this. I do my substitutions right here, and I actually execute my code right here. So everything that's in the pink, after it's been substituted, it just executes as if you would have hand-coded it up on the server. And then since this is not returning a record set, and I've got to make sure because I actually do return the record set, we're actually just going to return that XML. Oh, I'm sorry, we do return the record set because down here, this all handles for the insert, update, deletes for everything, even the selects. But down here, I just check for that one special case of if it's a select. This is just as similar to what we had done before. We do a file to array. I serialize it. I take the array, I put it into a buffer, and I tell it that it's going to be XML or binary, however you want to return it. I do the string build and I execute it. And when I execute it, it comes back into my buffer. And if it's a select, my record set is in the buffer. And if it's not a select, then we just get the statement coming back. Success executing the SQL query. Okay, so yeah, a lot of work went into creating these web services just to keep them generic. But the nice thing is, once they're created, you just don't touch them again, really. And I've tested it out using multiple tables, using multiple databases. And the database, I was testing all on SQL Server on one box, and I said, oh, I have another table that I want to hit that's on another server, and it happens to be MySQL instead. And the web services handle that nicely. And any questions? So anybody who's got the anybody who's got the training materials from us have the new version of this from last evening. So you're welcome to go and try that. This is a separate example from the example, the WinDev getting started examples. This is called WX examples, WS consume. So WX examples web services consume is what that stands for. There's another one that's kind of interesting, and this becomes powerful, and you really do have to be careful how you're going to handle it. But again, I make sure that it doesn't accept any insert, updates, deletes. But what this does, and this becomes really powerful, and you think, oh, all of a sudden there's something special I need to do in a web service that I haven't accounted for. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually letting you write all your code down here in your client and pass it up to the web service and have it execute. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so here I'm still using the HFilter. But let's run this. Okay, so I'm going to update this record. Select the record. Apply. And it just says it was modified. So let's take a look at that code. So what I'm doing here, since it was a modify, let's look at this first. It's right here. Scompile is string. If H reads, so what I did is I made sure I wrote this as W language code within here, straight W language. I didn't have it in the as a string, and I actually says contact.firstname equaled my field value and contact.lastname equals some field value. Then I did if not HModify to make sure it works. Well, anyway, I verified all of this works. I then changed my code so I could substitute in the values with %1, %2, %3, 4, and 5. Made that whole thing into a string. And then I just passed that up to the server. So if we look at the server, consume one, this is HExecuteCode, there's very little that's happening here, right? I mean, what I'm doing here is I accept it, I bring it into my structure, I do my replacements for HAdd, for inserts, updates, deletes, those kinds of things. And really, here's the key is, this is everything that I passed up from the client program. That was all of that HReadSeq first and the if not HModify. I just executed here. So this could be very powerful in that anything that you need to do up on the server as a one-off kind of thing, you can code down in your client program and just pass it up here and run. I'm not saying put this out there on your server. I'm just showing you what's possible. And there's 3 layers. We're doing security on here, but I just wouldn't have this necessarily sitting on your server unless you're going to possibly check into a little more security with this.
Yeah, those 3 layers should keep a kid in
Maybe even a
Croatia
little more,
busy
but
for
still, I'd be careful.
5-10 minutes at least.
But the whole thing with this is just to show what you can do with W language up on your web service or anywhere. You know, I keep talking about every day I use this, I'm amazed with what PCSoft has offered us. And to be able to create a web service, and I'll actually step through that of publishing it to show you how simple, again, that it is to do that. That they've just isolated us from all the stuff that Microsoft said they were going to isolate us with .NET. Everything is just wrapped up nicely. And so I really just have one more example, and it goes end to end. Let's run it, and I'll show you. And it's a typical type of desktop, procedural desktop that you may be working with, or even web dev. And we actually, so here's our typical table control. We modify it, we call up another form. It's gone out to the web service and it's retrieved that record. We are now going to update that back, and it says it was modified, and here's the record modified. Let's go back and clean that up, and then we'll look at the code for this. Let's go to the HReadSeq first. We'll go here. This is populating our data using our HFilter. So there's the one call that goes out to our procedure for that. Connection, table, filter. And then we're going to do a modify. We just have to, we can step through this one. We're just going to open our form, and we're going to pass it our sysID. We get to the form, and basically what we're doing here is we're checking to see if there's a sysID, which I would have if I am doing a modify. Otherwise, it would be 0. And if I'm doing that, I'm going to fill my buffer, and we're going to do HReadSeq first. Goes out to the web service, and it's only going to return that one record because we're using the primary key. It returns from the web service. I deserialize it, and I do source to screen because, again, these are linked to the array that I have, just as we had done before. And then we get it populated on the screen. And now to do our file maintenance on it, we just set the values of the fields right here. And then if it's an HAdd, we will call the HAdd WS or HModify WS, right, which in turn just calls the web service. So there's your one paradigm of a table control browse calling up a maintenance form and using these web services. And it works the exact same way in web dev, which I have one working. And to me, it's just a simple way of doing this. Not necessarily the most powerful. How Andy had broken his out last week and had done classes with his, I thought that was really, that shows I think the strength of WD and being able to use classes and isolate things and do the coding up there. And this one, I just took this little different approach. Any questions? No? Okay. We'll just move to the last example. And let me close the project. I want to close everything. I actually want to go over to mobile now. See how that works. This is the one for iOS. And this is the standard example that they have. And let me look at show you theirs. This is theirs. And so if we run it, it's using a hyperfile locally within iOS, or hyperfile right here. And so I've taken that and I have, I don't want to say enhanced it, but I've changed it. So now it will use web services. So if we take a look at the web services, okay, and again, I'm just using the same procedures as before. And now this time, my default connection, I can just specify that it's an open quote, close quote. So it goes up on the web service. It says, oh, my table up there in the analysis for contact, this is the connection we're going to use. So it just defaults to that. And we'll send up the filter, we'll send up the elements, and because I'm working with an image, I actually have to say what the encryption password is, the type of encryption, and the format of the encryption, and the actual field that's going to hold the image. So for right now, this is only working with one image per record. The next step will for me to handle multiple images. And so you'll see that we actually have to pass up the elements to the server just as we had done before. But the problem with iOS is that definition that we had before, so we could interrogate a structure. Even though they say that works on iOS, it does not work on iOS. So actually I have to go and just hard code my structures. I'm not wild about that. I wished we didn't have to do it, but I do. So here's my, I'm taking everything that I've got here in the structure, and I have to make it a string. So once they give us that syntax for a definition working in iOS, we can just get rid of this and use our function that we created to loop through. Okay. So we call the web service. I deserialize it when it comes back from the web service. And again, remember, this is the same call we were making in the WinDev application for getting the data. And so now we're able to use this on all three, WinDev, WebDev, and mobile, if you want to use the same web services. We make the call to the web service. We deserialize it. We take the buffer that we received back, which is here. We're going to deserialize it into an array that we have. And we're using XML. And Andy brought up a good point that there is a limit to how much data you can bring back from your web service. And I'm sure there's a limit whether it's XML or binary, but I'd certainly be thinking it'd be less than XML just because it's more verbose. And so once I have my array brought back, I'm actually going to cycle through it. And what I have to do now is every record could possibly have an image in there. And so I have to now uncrypt that image. So I give it the photo, the actual field, the encryption password, the type of encryption, and the format. I put it into a buffer, and then when I add my lines to the looper, so here's the looper I added to, the columns in the looper, and then the last one is actually the image itself. So let's go run this. And there's my images that came back, and this is sitting in SQL Server on one of my servers outside of the office here. And then we would, at this point, we could just do an update to this to validate. And again, I have to do the same type of thing. I make the call to the web service as we had done on the modify within the WinDev application. And here, the only difference I'm really doing, and let's go look at that. Validate. Okay. Oh, right here. I have to prepare the image for the record. So I've got a buffer image. So what I do is I'll actually take the image that is here. Because when we read the retrieve the record set and you select a record, it gets transferred from the looper over to here. Or when you do an add, when you're going to add a new record, you click on the little camera icon down here and it takes the picture, and the picture ends up in this control. So that's the image I'm always working with on an HAdd and an HModify. So what I'll have to do is I'll do a dsave image JPEG. So you give it the control that we're working with, but the image we want to do is we're going to keep it in memory. We're not writing out to a file. And then I'm going to crypt, and I'm going to use the password, the type of encryption, and then the format of the encryption. And this right here is important. I really had no way of knowing which type of encryption I was going to be using, so I just tried each one that they had, and this was the combination that works for the images, works well. So I crypt it, and then I put it into a string, right? And then I'll send it up to the web service. And so, but you'll see what's also happening here is because I send this up to the web service, then I have to actually, just before I write it into the web service, I actually have to decrypt it. Because remember, this happens on the web service itself. So I pass all of this up. This is the value, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I put in the value from simage and send it up. And then I just do an HAdd WS or a modify WS. Pass it up. So again, I don't know if I would classify that as a lot of code on the web service that I had to write, but the thing is that's the code I only have to write once. And just to show that, and then we are finished, I believe, with this, is I want to close this. And let's go back to WinDev. Notice we've been working with these windows for the contact and people. These are all in a SQL database. And then this work in progress is another table in another database. This is on another server, and this is MySQL instead of SQL Server. And so what I do here is I actually send up the connection information from a different server. So if I quickly look at project code, we look at the one for the server on MySQL is I pass that into here, and so let's just run this. Okay, let's go and get the data. And so that server connection is not up right now is my issue. So anyway, trust me, it does work, and it does go out to the other server, hitting the other server, the other database, and the other table. So that's kind of my take on web services. They're generic in that hopefully I don't have to touch those very often now to get out there and get to the data.
So Glenn, the thing that confuses me is I understand web services for mobile and for web, but you used it on the WinDev too. And why would you do that when you can hit it the same?
Web service is just a communication.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. You can use it through the 3 platforms and
right.
Not
it's just a
do
method
your,
of getting to the data. And
so it'd be the same code all the way through.
That's actually what Windows Foundation, that's what .NET's trying to get you to go to with the way the foundation services work. Everything is a web service. You don't do any direct data access.
Well, and one thing that's nice is you want to be able to get your data outside, and you don't want to open your ports to your database at all. Right? There's no direct from your program, there's no direct getting to the data. Yeah.
So it's this layer that's getting to the data.
For PCI.
Got it.
You know, for PCI compliance, you could not have your SQL Server accessible directly at all.
There's a lot of databases now, especially when you talk about cloud databases, you do not have a direct access to the database at all. You're all doing it completely through web services. So when you're talking about getting a cloud driver, somebody says, hey, I've got a cloud driver. Really what he's giving you is a wrapper or some kind of wrapper around calling web services. It's really what he's doing because there's no direct access to the database.
Okay. That's kind of hefty security anyway.
Well, you need to. The good thing about it is if you look at the 3-tiered level system that you have, this is your middle
tier,
part of your middle layer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's part of your middle tier is the communications between you and the database back and forth. It really kind of helps out the situation because literally you can have somebody build against your database and build software and stuff that you need to communicate, give them different looks and feels for what you're providing, and you don't have to worry about the end user provision and changing things. You're changing this, and then you're adding something to your web services and say, okay, here's the new web service changes. Go forth and modify your programs.
Right. Yeah, it's also in a team environment. It lets your data guy write all of your web services, while the UI guys are making pretty screens and all. They don't know how the data is actually structured under the covers. All they know is, you know, the data guy said, here's your web service that updates a customer. Now, he may have that customer table broke up into 6 different actual tables doing all kinds of fancy things on the back end. Your UI programmers don't need to know any of that.
They don't care. They shouldn't care. And
all they do is
it's back to a little bit of the ivory tower nature is what it is. Yeah.
So you data boys really control the world again.
We trying.
We're working on it.
Oh boy, empire.
The internet's finally getting to the point where we're really just one big ivory tower again.
Mm.
But instead of having wires running through the building, we now have wires running around the world.
Yeah, Andy and I were talking the other night. You know, we've been doing client server for 25 years, C/S. And what we realized the other day was all we did was change the slash to a cloud. So now it's C Cloud S.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to keep that in mind.
He who owns the data owns the world.
Is that why you two guys are up in that corner? Or listen to that laugh.
You know, it may be the dirty job. It's kind of like, I kind of liken it to the sewer worker, okay? You guys that run around in your houses and buildings and stuff, you never worry about what happens until the sewer backs up, okay? It just works. You don't care where it goes. You don't care what happens to it when it gets there. You just want to be able to know that you're pushing it to it and things are done, okay? We're the sewer worker. It ain't a pretty job, but we own the city.
As long as you have the water. If you have the water coming in and the sewer going out. Sewage. So Glenn, do you have any summary, or is there any questions out there? Keyed in chat, raise your hand. We'll put the mic up if you have a question. Anybody? Rob,
Either
Chris?
that or I just put them all to sleep.
Nobody? Glenn, you did the job again. But anyway, if you have the Glenn's class, you got the code to compile, and there you go. So you're gonna have this webinar to see what he did and do it yourself. Okay. If there's no other class or no more comments from the two guys and you, Glenn, we can call it a wrap.
I've got a couple of
unrelated
things.
Yeah, I'll be good at it.
Okay. Should I turn the recording off? Or? Okay.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, we can leave it on, turn it off, whichever way.
Okay, I'll leave it on.
Myself, Pragma, and Andy are working over the weekend on some more of the open source stuff. The open source initiative is now going to be the WX open source initiative. You know, that's two pretty good guys to have contributing open source with me. Pragma is working on creating a RAD model that wraps around all of our stuff so that you'll be able to generate an app with all of our open source stuff already embedded into it for you. We're hoping to have the first piece of that released over the weekend. And the other thing is, as you know, next week is the first Uncle Pete's Corner. And what we're going to be doing in that first one, we're going to go through the steps of grabbing that open source project and taking a piece of that and putting into one of the WinDev example apps so that you can see exactly what it takes to go through the steps of getting that open source and incorporating it into your project. So that's going to be the first Uncle Pete's Corner. And that's all I had, sir.
Well, that's good. Andy, you got anything you want to say?
All I can say is be good or be good at it.
That's all I needed to hear to shut it down. Okay, we'll see you all next week. And Pete, we need to get your headliner after you do your Uncle Pete's thing.
Yep.
Later, guys.